They are crises that do not arrive asking for permission. They enter life as if they rip the ground away without warning, throwing off the rhythm of the days, changing the weight of your thoughts, and making you feel that, all at once, everything that once seemed solid has become too unstable to hold any peace at all. And perhaps the hardest part is not only the problem itself, perhaps the hardest part is what it awakens inside you. The feeling of vulnerability, the fear of losing control, the impulse to solve everything immediately, the mind running non-stop after answers that still do not exist, the heart trying to catch up with a reality that changed faster than the soul could understand. Many people, when they enter a crisis, think the real danger lies only in what is happening outside. But there is a detail here that almost no one realizes early enough. A crisis does not test only your external resources. It mainly tests the inner structure from which you interpret, endure, and move through chaos. And this is where Stoicism becomes so powerful, because it does not promise a life without crisis. It does not promise easy days, predictable people, or paths without loss. What it offers is something far rarer and far more valuable, a way of remaining whole while life tries to fragment you, a way of crossing through the shock without handing the shock the government of your mind, an inner discipline that does not eliminate pain, but prevents pain from becoming the absolute ruler of your consciousness. And if this speaks to something real you are living right now, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments what kind of crisis most tends to throw you off balance inside. Because many times overcoming begins at the exact moment we stop fighting only the chaos outside and start understanding how it is operating inside the soul. The first truth that most people avoid, but that Stoicism looks at directly, is this: crisis is not only an interruption of life, it is a revelation that is painful to accept. Because when life tightens around you, all you want is for the suffering to end. You do not want to think about learning, character, or maturity. You want relief, you want the pressure to stop, you want normal life back. But there is something that almost always becomes inevitable in moments of rupture: what the crisis exposes. Because while everything is working, many things inside us remain hidden. Our emotional dependencies remain hidden. Our need for control remains hidden. Our attachment to recognition remains hidden. Our illusion of security remains hidden. Our inability to endure uncertainty remains hidden. Our tendency to place peace in things that are far too fragile remains hidden. Then the crisis comes and tears the curtain away from all of it. Suddenly, you realize how much you needed people to be predictable in order to feel stable. You realize how much your identity depended on a role, on a relationship, on a plan, on an image. You realize how much your calm had been supported by external circumstances that were never truly under your command. And that is why certain crises hurt so deeply. Not because they bring only a problem, but because they dismantle an entire structure of silent illusions. And when that structure collapses, many people think they are being destroyed, when in truth, they are being exposed. That does not mean pain is good. It does not mean romanticizing loss, failure, illness, injustice, abandonment, or collapse. It means only recognizing that crises reveal what comfortable times are able to hide with ease. And what they reveal, however uncomfortable it may be, can become the starting point of a truer kind of strength. Marcus Aurelius understood this with an almost unsettling lucidity. He did not write to himself as someone expecting a life without pressure. He wrote to himself as someone who knew the world would be hard, changing, uncertain, and often unfair, and who still refused to live as a slave to what was happening outside. That is the essence of the Stoic posture toward crisis. It is not denying the impact. It is not pretending to have artificial serenity. It is not acting as though pain does not move you. It is recognizing the blow without handing it the key to your soul. It is feeling the strike without allowing it to automatically turn into irreversible inner chaos. Because one thing is the crisis itself, another thing is the way the mind begins to inhabit it. And that is where so many people get lost. They do not suffer only because of what happened. They also suffer because of everything the mind begins to do around what happened. They suffer through extreme interpretation. They suffer through fear of the future. They suffer through mental repetition. They suffer through the urge to predict catastrophe. They suffer through the desperate need to understand everything right now. They suffer through whatever the crisis awakens that is old, unresolved, fragile, and unacknowledged. That is why the Stoic way of overcoming crisis begins with a decisive separation, separating the fact from the narrative you are building around the fact. One thing is the real problem. Another thing is the mental empire you may build around it. One thing is living through a loss. Another thing is concluding that your life has lost all meaning. One thing is having a plan interrupted. Another thing is deciding that nothing will ever work again. One thing is being disappointed. Another thing is turning that disappointment into a permanent vision of the world and of other people. Epictetus said that it is not things themselves that disturb people, but the judgments they make about them. And that sentence, when it truly enters life, completely changes the way a person faces moments of rupture, because it brings attention back to the exact place where crisis usually grows beyond what is necessary. Inside interpretation, Maybe right now there is something concrete hurting you. Maybe you are dealing with a loss, a sudden change, a financial problem, a disappointment of fear, an illness, an emotional collapse, a feeling of being lost. All of that is real. All of that is heavy. But there is a question that can keep your mind from collapsing along with the problem. What actually happened? And what am I adding to it? That question seems simple, but it is a key because many times the initial suffering is already large enough, and still the mind amplifies it with hasty conclusions, with old memories, with dark projections, with a fantasy that the current pain defines all of reality. That is how an external crisis turns into a crisis of identity, and it is exactly at that point that Stoicism enters as a break of lucidity. It does not tell you not to feel. It teaches you not to immediately believe everything you feel. It does not tell you to deny pain. It teaches you not to turn pain into the final author of truth. Perhaps one of the greatest strengths a person can develop in a crisis is the ability not to leave their own mind alone with their own wound, because the wound, when it speaks without any counterweight, wants to turn a moment into destiny. It wants to say that everything is over. It wants to convince you there is no way out, that no one is trustworthy, that you lost too much, failed too much, were too weak, felt too much. But intense suffering is not the same as clear vision. Sometimes intense suffering is only a deeply wounded part trying to dominate the whole interpretation of life. And maturity is realizing that you can hear that part without blindly obeying everything it says. This is one of the first great marks of Stoic maturity. Being in crisis without turning crisis into identity. Being shaken without concluding that you have become incapable. Being afraid without deciding that your fear is the exact measure of reality. Living through dark days without concluding that your whole life has become darkness. It seems like a subtle difference, but it is enormous, because when a person stops seeing crisis as something passing through life and starts seeing it as a definition of their essence, they can no longer fight with clarity. The soul shrinks, perspective disappears, pain becomes the inner language. Stoicism breaks that by reminding you of a truth that is both hard and liberating. You do not choose every crisis that arrives, but you can choose the posture with which you receive it in the formation of your character. That does not erase suffering. It does not immediately solve the problem, but it restores dignity to the process, because it takes you out of the position of being only a victim of chance and places you back in the position of someone who, even while wounded, can still participate in their own inner response. And perhaps the central word here is this response, because crisis always arrives with two forces. One is the unavoidable impact, the other is the constructed response. The impact may not be under your control. The response, little by little, can be. That is why the Stoic way of overcoming crisis does not begin by asking how to eliminate all pain, but by asking how to stop pain from destroying your capacity to choose. When life enters collapse, the first thing the mind wants to do is run. Run toward fear, toward anticipation, toward anger, toward guilt, toward self-destruction, toward drama, toward excessive explanation, toward the urgency of solving everything at once. But crisis almost never resolves at the same speed the impulse wants it to. And it is exactly here that inner discipline becomes decisive, because maturity is not the absence of reaction. It is the ability not to give the first reaction the right to decide everything. When you learn to pause, even in the middle of a shock, something begins to change. And pausing is not passivity. It is not denying urgency. It is not running from responsibility. Pausing is preventing your most disorganized part from taking over the wheel. It is not responding to fire with more fire. It is not mentally feeding what is already difficult enough. It is creating a space between the blow and the movement. And that space, however small it may seem, is one of the greatest signs of mental strength that exists, because it is there that consciousness breathes again. It is there that impulse stops being king. It is there that you realize once more that not everything you feel must be obeyed in the same moment. There is an important image here. Imagine that crisis knocks on your door like a storm. If you open all the windows of the house and then turn on fans inside, the destruction increases. Many people do exactly this without realizing it. A real problem already exists, but they feed the problem with apocalyptic interpretations, with hours and hours of mental repetition, with violent inner conversations, with cruel comparisons, with future scenarios that may never even exist. What Stoicism teaches is not to become an accomplice to your own storm, not to collaborate with chaos, not to amplify inwardly what is already difficult enough outwardly. Perhaps this is one of the most transformative lessons of all. There is unavoidable suffering and there is cultivated suffering. The first comes from life. The second comes from the way you begin to carry life inside your mind. And overcoming a crisis with greater strength depends greatly on reducing cultivated suffering. It means stopping the transformation of every difficulty into proof of total failure. It means not turning every uncertainty into complete catastrophe. It means not mixing the present problem with every old wound your mind wants to reactivate all at once. It means not drawing eternal conclusions from temporary days. Of course, this is not simple. When someone is wounded, frightened, or under pressure, the whole system wants urgency. The body tenses, the mind accelerates, thought runs toward the worst. Imagination loses its limits. That is why the Stoic posture is not built only with beautiful phrases, but with training. Training to observe what is happening inside you. Training to notice when crisis has already moved from fact into narrative. Training to see when fear is pretending to be lucidity. Training to return to what is real, to what is possible, to what is within reach now. Because another great mistake in times of crisis is wanting to solve all of life at once. The mind wants immediate conclusion, final explanation, total meaning, absolute guarantee. But crises rarely offer that at the beginning. Many times, they arrive first as confusion, as rupture, as suspension, as emptiness. And the attempt to rip total clarity out of a moment that is still open only increases anguish. Stoic wisdom understands that. It does not require you to understand everything now in order to keep acting with dignity. It teaches that it is possible to cross what is not yet clear without turning the darkness into despair. That is maturity. It is enduring what is incomplete without entirely dissolving inside it. Perhaps you are living exactly that. Today, a moment in which there are no ready answers, in which meaning has not yet appeared, in which waiting feels too long, in which what once seemed obvious has now become fog. And perhaps your mind is trying to solve that with excess thought. But thinking more does not always mean seeing better. Sometimes it is only circling around fear. There is a very quiet strength in admitting, I still do not understand everything this means, but I can continue choosing dignity in the middle of this crossing. I can continue being truthful. I can continue not abandoning myself. I can continue taking care of what is within my reach. I can continue refusing collapse as the permanent language of my soul. This is where Stoicism shows itself less as theory and more as a practice of inner sovereignty, because it always brings you back to what is still yours. Even in crisis, there are still things that remain yours. Your character, your response, the way you treat others, the way you speak to yourself, what you choose to feed in the mind, what you decide to repeat as narrative, the space you give to chaos inside your own heart. And that matters much more than it seems. Because in difficult times, it is very easy to begin acting beneath yourself, to become harder, more unjust, more aggressive, more careless, more desperate. Crisis generates a silent temptation, the temptation to believe that because life has become disordered, everything inside you may become disordered too. Stoicism rejects that. It teaches that the world may be in disorder without you needing to reproduce that disorder inside the soul. It teaches that adversity may knock on your door without you inviting it to govern the entire house. That is not coldness, it is structure. It is the choice not to sacrifice your consciousness on the altar of emotional urgency. And perhaps that is one of the highest forms of strength, continuing to preserve your own center while everything around you seems unstable. But there is something even deep. Crisis does not reveal only what is fragile. It also reveals what can be built, because in many cases, what pain destroys is exactly what could no longer continue in the same way. An identity excessively dependent on the external. A peace based on guarantee. A self-worth sustained by performance. A childish vision of control. An exaggerated trust in idealized images. Of course, deconstruction hurts, but many times it is the first step toward the birth of something more solid. There is a strength that appears only when false structures fall. There is a lucidity that is born only after fantasy ends. There is a sobriety that arises only when life forces you to admit that you cannot control everything, predict everything, hold everything, save everything. And that sobriety, although born in pain, produces a kind of fortitude that easy seasons almost never build. Because comfortable times reveal preferences, hard times reveal structure. Comfortable times show what you like to be. Hard times show what you actually are when life does not cooperate. And not to humiliate you, but to reveal you. Perhaps that is why so many people, looking back, realize that certain crises that seemed like the end of everything were also the beginning of a truer version of themselves. Not because the crisis was good, but because it stripped away excess, dismantled dependencies, removed illusions, demanded presence, forced repositioning. This is something most people understand only later. In the middle of crisis, the feeling is lost. Only much later does the clarity appear that along with the loss, something was being cleaned away, something was being repositioned, something was maturing. That is why the Stoic way of coming out stronger from a crisis does not involve denying suffering. but refusing it as a final identity. It involves accepting the impact without building an altar to it. It involves understanding that pain may pass through you without receiving the right to become the permanent center of your life. It involves learning to say, this shook me, this showed me fragilities, this dismantled things inside me, but I can also use this rupture to build a deeper consciousness, a steadier mind, and a strength less dependent on circumstances. And perhaps here lies one of the great keys that separates those who merely survive from those who truly mature: the relationship with their own inner world during crisis. Because there are people who, in addition to the problem they are facing, still become enemies of themselves in the middle of the process. They demand perfect strength from themselves, humiliate themselves for feeling fear, call themselves weak, condemn themselves for not handling it better, and that deepens everything. A soul already in crisis does not need more violence coming from within. It needs firmness, yes, but also dignity. It needs truth, but not humiliation. Stoicism, when understood in a mature way, does not teach cruelty toward yourself. It teaches responsibility with humanity. It teaches you to observe yourself rigorously without destroying yourself in the process. It teaches you to recognize disorder without turning it into a reason to despise yourself. That is very important, because a person only comes out stronger from a crisis when they somehow continue being a shelter for themselves inside it. And that does not mean sparing yourself from reality. It means not abandoning yourself at the exact moment you most need inner presence. There is a silent sentence that every person in crisis needs to learn to repeat inwardly. I may be broken in parts, but I still do not need to surrender my whole self to collapse. I may be tired, confused, wounded, frightened, and still continue choosing small acts of sobriety. I can breathe before reacting. I can refuse to feed this destructive thought. I do not need to draw every conclusion today. I do not need to punish myself for not yet having answers. I do not need to turn my crisis into a prophecy about my whole life. And it is exactly like this, in small, invisible acts, that strength begins to organize itself, not as spectacle, not as heroic performance, but as a repeated decision not to collaborate with your own abyss. It is in those choices that a person stops being only someone crossed by crisis and begins becoming someone who learns to cross crisis with a new kind of consciousness. And little by little, something changes. Not necessarily the problem first, not always the circumstances. Sometimes the external remains difficult for a while, but inside, the axis begins to reorganize. The mind becomes less of a hostage, the heart less desperate, interpretation less extreme, identity less glued to pain. And that is where true strengthening begins. Not when crisis goes away, but when you stop being completely dragged by it. Perhaps that is the deepest meaning of coming out stronger. It is not coming out without scars. It is not coming out without fatigue. It is not coming out triumphant, invulnerable, immune to fear. It is coming out with more truth, with more discernment, with fewer illusions about life, but also fewer illusions about your own fragility. It is coming out knowing that not everything can be controlled, but much can be led from within. It is coming out less dependent on the external in order to maintain some stability. It is coming out more capable of remaining present when the world fails again, because it will fail again. Life will remain uncertain. People will continue to disappoint. Plans will continue to change. The unexpected will continue to exist. The question is not whether another crisis will come. The question is whether the current crisis will leave in you only fear or also structure, whether it will leave only defense or also depth, whether it will leave only exhaustion or also a more solid center. So if today you are in the middle of a crisis, hold this with you. Not everything that is happening is under your control, but the way you allow it to inhabit your mind still matters immensely. You do not need to understand everything now in order not to lose yourself. You do not need to solve your whole life today in order to begin positioning yourself differently within it. You do not need to deny your pain in order to be strong. You only need not to hand over your entire soul to it. Because the Stoic way of overcoming crisis is not fleeing reality. It is remaining in reality with dignity. It is enduring impact without unnecessarily enlarging chaos. It is choosing lucidity where impulse wants desperation. It is choosing presence where the mind wants escape. It is choosing character where pain wants bitterness. And when a person begins to live this way, even imperfectly, something truly changes. Crisis remains crisis, but it no longer has unrestricted access to the center. It still hurts, but it does not dictate everything. It still frightens, but it does not govern everything. And at that exact point, even before life fully reorganizes, strength has already begun to be born. Because, in the end, coming out stronger is not only about defeating the problem. It is about not allowing the problem to destroy what was most valuable in you while it lasted. It is about preserving character, consciousness, dignity, the ability to breathe and choose in the middle of chaos. And when that happened, even silently, you realized that the crisis did not come only to test you. It also came to show you that there was within you a structure you perhaps did not even know yet. A firmness that would only appear when life truly tightened, and a deeper way of existing that could only be born after everything in you that was fragile had finally been exposed.